we have an imaginary assistant to Kai, whose name is Jeremy. And Kai just constantly monologues to Jeremy, just complaining about everything about his life.
Yeah, he just has a complete unfiltered access.
Or he'll be like, Jeremy, let's go out to karaoke.
If you were going to go out to karaoke, what would be your song, Jeremy?
Hello, folks. This is Josie Herman.
And Michael Allen Herman.
We are the creators of Silvertongues and The Call of the Void.
We are so excited to share this special behind-the-scenes, exclusive conversation that we're going to have about the lore. And we even have some sneaky hidden little details about Call of the Void and Silvertongues that you may not have gotten the first time listening through.
That's true. These questions are all coming from our donors and our Patreon members, so thank you all so much for supporting us. We really can't do it without you, and thanks for sending in these questions as well.
We also want to say that this interview does contain spoilers, so please make sure you listen to all of Silvertongues first before you continue.
All right, so we're going to jump into some questions. Our first one is from Allison. What is your inspiration for writing Silvertongues?
There's a couple things, honestly. One of the first was we were very interested in this idea of the power of one's voice. It's like everyone's a little bit of a silver tongue, right? When you speak, your words have power and they have meaning. And we were interested in the idea of that. And what if someone spoke with truth and what if someone spoke with lies? And that kind of started to, build out the different sides of the world of Silvertongues.
Yeah, and I think another inspiration that we had, similar to Call of the Void when we traveled to New Orleans for the first time, that's really one of the first things that instigated the story of the Call of the Void was just being in New Orleans. Similar to that, we got the opportunity to travel to the island of Kauai. And the more that we talked to the people on the island, we would ask them, how long have you been in Hawaii and stuff like that? And they would answer with this like, I'm not really sure. I moved out here and haven't really left. So I think we're very interested and inspired by this kind of island time idea where you move out to this beautiful, gorgeous place and you kind of forget about your life.
Yeah, like time moves differently on an island. And also, we also wanted to tell a story that was kind of like a summer blockbuster and really try to tell something funny.
Yeah, I think that it was a interesting thing to find the right level of that because there are many versions, many iterations of Silvertongues that we worked on before finding this one. And some of them were like crazy, almost slapstick, comedic, nothing serious, nothing scary at all in them. And then I think the very first version was completely opposite, like nothing funny in it. So we finally arrived at this one, which is, like you said, kind of blockbuster. It's funny, but there's also some thrills.
Absolutely. Like shows like The Mummy, movies like The Mummy.
Or Indiana Jones.
Because Indiana Jones and The Mummy, they get scary, but they're also so funny. So funny, so fun. And we wanted to have both those flavors too.
So let's go on to our next question. Our next question is from Jennifer. Jennifer says, the sound effects are spot on. Thank you, Jennifer. What's the process for recording those? Planes, the meteor strike on the lake, etc.?
Yeah, it's sort of 50-50, maybe 60-40 of finding sound effects versus creating sound effects in-house. We do both. So we use websites like freesounds.org or there's not some other ones like Pixabay, things like that, as long as they're royalty-free. And so we use some of those places for sound effects for the especially difficult ones. Maybe things like you said, like plane crashing is a sound that we don't just readily have available.
Yeah, but you'd say that, but then I also remember us doing some Foley for stuff like, I remember Tash's airplane gun noises. Michael at this one point had this bowl and was spinning this glass bowl and it was making this like chunk 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 sound that we used as part of Tash's charging up the
kind of like the machine gun fire.
Yeah, the machine gun fire of like that whoa 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 whoa. So you might be surprised at what you can scrap together in your kitchen to make battle sounds.
Yeah, it's almost like when you're listening through and we're sort of polishing after we've put in some dialogue, you like have an instinct as an artist to go like, okay, we need a little bit of like a heavy like whoop noise here. Mm-hmm. If this is a gun, it's got to sound like heavy. You start to just, kind of wander around your house and say like, okay, what can I use to make that sound? Or, or I guess you could start looking at online too. But yeah, you start to like think like, okay, it needs to be a heavier hit or it needs to be, a glass shatter. I need something.
Yeah. And whenever we do make a sound, especially something like the meteor strike on the lake or a plane battle,
there are so many sounds. It's not like we just find one sound and go like, oh, that's a meteor strike in a lake. I mean, I think the meteor strike was, how many sounds would you say? Like
I think
10?
it was 5 or 6.
Oh,
maybe 10, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was something like 10.
10 altogether. So like the
altogether.
initial hit was like, I think 5 or 6. And then like, you're right, like the echoes away. And it was another like 5 or 6 to make it.
And then there's another part of that too, which is like lining it up, the perfect placement of that with the dialogue and the music and everything too. So we really try to make everything feel like the pacing of it is happening all at the right time for you to just really immerse yourself in that and feel it all through.
And something we found with Silvertongues, which was sort of interesting, was that, you know, even the style of the certain sound effect needs to be taken into account. There's a lot of like funny, quirky things that happen in Silvertongues, like, I don't know, like a snake hiss or like a certain hit, or like a metal hit or something like that. And that like stylistically was also put into the recording to make sure the sounds were going to like make a joke land or something like that. So there's some of that too.
Yeah. Like a metal hit, there's various metal hits. And if you want a metal hit to sound funny, that's going to sound different than a dramatic moment.
Right. Like when Colin drops the shovel in the gas station.
Oh, yeah.
The gas station attendant drops the shovel. It's very specific kind of like clatter, kind of messy, loud clatter, which is funny.
Yeah. Next question is from Scotty Schluter.
Woo! Love Scotty.
Scotty's great. Scotty has both roles in Silvertongues and in Call of the Void, actually. He plays Mitchell Liu, the cab driver in Call of the Void. And then he also plays Frank in Silvertongues.
Yes, as well as some Guava Goddess customers.
And some Guava Goddess customers. Scotty says, very, very great question here from Scotty. He says, I'd love to hear about your experience working with Dan Johnson. He played a major antagonist in the Call of the Void, and he's a very different character with a very different voice in Silvertongues. Was the vocal direction process any different between shows? This is a great, great question because I love talking about our actors. So first of all, it just starts with Dan Johnson being an incredible, incredible actor. So if you didn't know, Dan obviously he plays Rasco in Silvertongues. He also plays Necromon and Officer Mason in Call of the Void. So man's got range. And Dan himself said in an interview that for Call of the Void, he was sort of putting on voices, but in Silvertongues, he just wanted to bring his own natural voice to it. Dan is an actor that comes in the room already having so many incredible ideas. So my focus with Dan was to find the moments where there's significant changes in his character arc. So finding these moments that he feels vulnerable in and finding how that grows throughout the show, how he comes to a realization of his own power and grows throughout that.
Absolutely.
I think also finding these different layers of now this is a romantic part, so really ease into this. And it was also fun to go back and forth with Dan and Sabrina, who plays Tavi, to play both the relationship that they have in the main run of the show as well as the mini episodes, because obviously there is much more of a familiarity in the mini episodes where they are married and know that they're married and they have a sense of familiarity with each other. Whereas in the main episodes, there's a shyness. There's a feeling of getting to know each other as well as themselves.
Yeah.
So that was fun to play with both those characters. Okay, next we have a few questions here from Rebecca. Rebecca, we love. She's been with us for quite a while, listening to Silvertongues and Call of the Void here.
Who was your favorite character to write in the show, and who was the most difficult? Great question.
Favorite character to write in the show? I don't know. Maybe Darcy. I think Darcy was very fun to write. I don't think we've ever written a character like Darcy before. I mean, this man talks to snakes. So, and I think he was a bit of a wild card. We weren't totally sure if the audience was going to accept this crazy character or not. Luckily, I think they did.
Yep.
But yeah, it was a little bit of a risk, I would say, to write someone like Darcy, who is just kind of unique and very different than anything that we've written before.
Yeah, I think another character who was challenging to write is, a familiar character, actually. I think Fargo was also a challenge in this season because we wanted her to be her. We wanted her to be Fargo, but also to be her own self in this podcast. And we didn't want anybody who had not heard Call of the Void to feel like they were outside of a joke. You know, like when they encounter Fargo, we wanted everyone to go like, oh, this is a sort of a quirky character. We're excited to meet her. And of course, if you know who she is, it's even deeper. You're like, oh my gosh, Fargo's back. But we wanted like the first time, fresh listener to also experience Fargo for the first time. So trying to like navigate Fargo on sort of 2 tracks like that was, I guess, challenging, not because Fargo was hard, but just because like the structure.
Yeah, I remember going various different versions as we're developing different drafts of the show. There were drafts that just felt like if I didn't know who Fargo was, I would not think this was funny, or I wouldn't understand it at all. So we kind of had to find that sweet spot of introducing Fargo for people who don't know who she is, but then also making her the lovable character that she is when we meet her in Call of the Void.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question being, what aspect of the show stretched your creative/creator muscles the most? Man, we joke that this show never wanted to be made in the first place. Truly, this show fought us every step of the way, whether that be recording, writing, editing. Every single phase presented its own challenges, and it was tricky.
Yeah.
There were a lot of big challenges with this one.
To just talk about the writing for a second, since I think that was especially challenging,
there are so many versions of it, and I think you'd be surprised. There is a version of this where Roscoe and Tavi are not married. There was a version of this where Roscoe had a wife and daughter that died in a car crash. I think Kai killed them in a car crash or something, like accidentally.
Yeah.
There was a version where, believe this or not, there was a version where Roscoe wasn't even a Silvertongue.
Yeah.
I don't think we found that until a little later, because I think one of the concepts was just looking at how if somebody lies to you, that can really shake up your world. So that was just a theme that we had at one point, and we didn't quite find the beautiful idea of like, like Roscoe is a Silvertongue and Roscoe has power. So there were just so many versions of this and so many things that didn't make sense, frankly.
Yeah, and to shout out to Josie for solving some of these problems. There was one day, fateful day, we were looking at the script and looking at the outline and how everything was going, and it wasn't working. And we had been working on it for months and months, and we started to take this walk around our neighborhood, and at the beginning of that walk, I think both of us thought, if we can't solve this today, we have to trash this project. It was that close, guys. It was like, we can't figure this out, and this project just is too difficult. I really felt this despair of this is not going to work, and I think we came home, I truly was ready to hit that delete key, and my dear wife, she was like, let me take one more swing at it. Let me see if I can try to solve this. And you thought of this great idea, which...
Sure, yeah, the dual narrative, the 2 timeline kind of thing. That was, believe it or not, that was way late in the game when we decided to do that. So before that, we were really, really struggling with how does Roscoe find out he's a Silvertongue now? If we want him to be a Silvertongue, we kind of kept going back and forth with all of this stuff because it was like, this is just so weird. It's not working. It feels very contrived. So then at one point, I just wrote out this whole huge outline, like episode 1, this happens, this happens, this happens. And then we go into episode 1.5, where we meet Roscoe and Tavi in the past. And then we go back to episode 2, and they're in the present. And that was very new. We weren't sure if it was going to be clear. We weren't sure if the audience was going to be on board for something like that. And we were just kind of like, let's try it.
Yeah. But it did work, and there was this great feeling once we started to break the story in that way. It just, everything started to click. It was like, now people are going to understand the past. They're going to understand more about this world and how difficult this journey has been for our 2 main characters. So it really started to click in, and it's a right choice when more problems start being solved. You make a choice and then 4 problems get solved, and you're like, oh, we're going in the right direction, Yeah. So that was a great feeling.
I remember another interesting thing that solved was just introducing the character of Kai, because in previous versions of this, we were having a hard time sneaking in the character of Kai and introducing him as a bad guy, because we wanted him to be this bad guy, but it was we didn't meet him until the end. Imagine the moment where Roscoe and Kai reunite in the story. That at some point was the first time that we met Kai.
Yeah, which is episode 6. The
right?
ending of episode 6.
So it was kind of like, hi, I'm Kai, and I did all this bad stuff to you, which you don't really remember, and nobody knows who I am, but I'm the bad guy.
Right. And here's why. Because somebody who has this power that they can say anything and it changes your mind, that's a very powerful villain. And if you just get in the room with that person's going to mess you up,
That's
so
true. We had a hard time with that. I forgot about that.
Yep.
Yeah, it was really hard to have scenes with Kai because because they would just walk into the room and he would Silvertongue them.
Yeah, which is also great because it presented this really extreme villain that once we started to navigate that, it feels like a very special treatment of like an intense villain, right? But yeah,
but it was really difficult.
He was a stinker. He was a stinker for a long time.
He was a stinker. Yeah, so maybe if there was a question that was the most difficult person to write, Fargo was difficult, but I also think Kai was really difficult to write.
Next question, sort of like a tag along to that, was when you started writing the series, was it always intended that Roscoe and Tavi would be together? Was the happy ending always intended, or did that evolve over time? You know, we do think about endings pretty early on in the process. We kind of get an idea of the world, of the characters, and then pretty quickly we go, okay, we got to think about an ending here, because famously a lot of podcasts don't end, and we always want our endings to mean something and to matter, you know? So we did start thinking about that pretty fast. And we mentioned that there was a version that Tavi and Roscoe were not together.
They weren't married.
They weren't married,
past,
but I think there was a version of them sort of getting together in that classic kind of, you know, swashbucklery kind of way where they kind of like get together in the end of this sort of big adventure. We kind of had that idea pretty early on, I think.
Pretty early on, although now I'm going to say there was also another version where it was just two buddies. It was like two guys. Do you remember that?
Yes, it was. Tavi was originally a guy.
Yeah.
It was going to be kind of this like stoner bro
comedy. buddy comedy.
Isn't that so silly, guys? Like to think about that like now is like so silly that was a version of this. That there was no romance, there was no marriage, there was no Zoe at the end. There was just...
And then it was just going to be like, bro, that was a crazy adventure.
Sure. Yeah, which is really, really kind of silly. But yeah, it's much deeper. And again, like once you start seeing like problems solving other problems, and we started finding ourselves moving towards this ending that meant a lot to us, and we felt like it meant a lot to the characters too.
Yeah, I think that one of the themes that evolved as we were creating it was this idea of finding your home, this idea of feeling homeless within yourself, as Roscoe says, and then finally finding that place, not just a physical place, but that emotional place where that's your home. Once we kind of realized that that is where we wanted to take the story, that evolved into Roscoe and Tavi finding out that their home is together with each other and also with this beautiful daughter that they have.
Oh, yeah. And that idea of emotional homelessness, that's a good thing to talk about, too. We were very interested in this idea of emotional homelessness. And part of that's because you've been lied to, right? They've been lied to as characters by Kai, and that's definitely affected how they feel about themselves and how they feel like where they belong in the world. And coming to terms with the truth was one of the ways that they, you know, solved that. They figured out where their home was again. It wasn't like they never had a home. They actually always had a home, but it was that they were lied to and sort of distracted away from where they belong. Another really good question here, which is Tash short for anything? Tash Kaminsky.
Yes. So how I came up with the name Tash, actually just not that exciting of a thing, but it's kind of interesting.
It's cool.
So where we live, close to our house, there's a theater called the Jane Tash Theater. That's the first theater that I ever performed on. I was like a little kid or whatever, and I was in a theater program, and we performed on the stage called the Jane Tash. And it's just right down the road from where we live now. And I remember I was just driving one day and I saw that sign for the Jane Tash Theater. And I was like, Tash, that's such a good name. And we were looking for a name for Fargo's sister. We had the concept of Fargo's sister, but we didn't have a name for a little while. And something about that just seemed to fit. I don't know.
Yeah.
We have a question from Julia here. Julia plays
Joanne
Delman. Yeah. So thank you for this next question, Julia. We have, why didn't Tavi and Roscoe get their pre-Kai memories back when his spell was broken? Did that happen to others on the island as well? This is a great question. I'm so glad you asked this because I think there's a really interesting answer to this. This was something that we talked about a little bit. When we were writing it, we were talking about, well, should they get their memories back when Kai, you know, it's like light bulb, ding! And would everyone kind of snap back into having all of the memories and stuff that they had pre the lie from Kai? And I think the reason why we decided to do it the way that we did was because we wanted the Silvertonguing ability to feel not like a spell necessarily. It's a power that has an effect on someone. And even when that is taken away from Kai, that lie that Kai said to the people, that remains until they are confronted with the actual truth. So there's two things that happen at the end, right? Roscoe takes away Kai's power, But then Roscoe also has to tell the whole island that Kai's lies don't affect them anymore. Or meaning like, hey, he says like, you guys are worthy. You guys are not nothing. You guys don't have to just follow whatever Kai is doing. So both of those things had to happen. Like Roscoe still had to tell the truth to all these people. And I think that the lie that Kai told Roscoe and Tavi to take away all of their memory and stuff, that remained until Roscoe and Tavi were confronted with the truth. You know, that moment where they go, oh my gosh, we have a daughter. After that, I think they start to get their memories back.
Yeah, and on a more like meta level, it's like the same thing happens when you're lied to in life, right? Like if someone lies to you, it hurts you. It's like a wound. The first thing you say is like, I'm not going to believe that lie anymore. But it takes some time to heal through that. And you do have to like see the truth, and you have to accept, the truth in order to like heal through that, right? And I think that's very much the journey at the very end there, where it's like they've experienced a lie, they've experienced some trauma, and now it's their chance to, slowly heal through that. And then, yeah, like over the course of some time, I think that those memories eventually do sort of come back into their minds, as well as with everyone else in Kalani.
Next question that we have, our next few set of questions here are from Amanda. Amanda,
dear friend Amanda,
our
love
dear
her.
friend Amanda, who you might recognize as Simone Summers from Call of the Void. So Amanda has some questions for us here. First being, what was the hardest part of finding the balance to giving a lot of great nods to the Call of the Void while still honoring Silvertongues as its own wonderful thing?
I think Josie was really good at that. She found ways, it's like entering into the headspace of like a first-time listener to just Silvertongues and making that story work first and foremost. And she was really good at identifying like what would be a good joke or a good nod that sort of landed on that first level of like a first-time listener, and then just like as like a little extra bonus spice to go to Call of the Void as well. I think Josie was just really good at like in scene by scene knowing if we were talking about Call of the Void too much or if we were just like a nice little nod.
And I'll say too, there were various things that we tried. I think there was a version where Kai was actually somebody that was from JM Labs, like another. And we just thought like that's Etsy's journey. So we wanted Kai to be his own thing. We didn't want to repeat things from Call of the Void. We didn't want to go through the same character arcs at all. But yeah, I mean, I think the moment that we decided that this was going to be a crossover, because it wasn't always a crossover. That's another interesting thing. Silvertongues was not always a crossover with Call of the Void. In fact, I think not till later on, we didn't even have Fargo in the story.
No.
The first thing that we introduced as a crossover was actually the character of Tash being Fargo's sister. But Fargo wasn't even going to be in the story at all. It was just a very, very, very subtle nod. Like she was going to say that her last name was Kaminsky, and then she was going to like mention her sister or something. And you're going to be like, oh, that's interesting.
And the way that escalated was we started writing like another kind of conspiratory sort of character, like a character who was kind of zany, just like Fargo. And we realized, like, why are we writing another character?
Literally, I remember the moment we were like sitting on the floor going, okay, this character it's interesting, but like, why doesn't this character just be Fargo if we're going to do that? And then we looked at each other and went, wait a minute. And so it was really fun, honestly, to find moments where we could cross over into Call of the Void.
And I think that the guiding force there is usually just like, if we've done it before, we try not to repeat it. And that's sort of one of the best ways to navigate, like how to keep them separate, have like a little bit of overlap in a healthy way, but not get too, claustrophobic by just doing the same thing.
We really wanted Silvertongues to feel almost like the opposite of Call of the Void in the aesthetic. Like we wanted it to be this huge, vibrant splash of color, whereas Call of the Void is dark and moody and brooding. We like love all that as well. But we wanted Silvertongues to just almost be so vibrant, just like in your face. It's like literally the same universe as Call of the Void, but it's so different as far as the style of it, the aesthetic of it.
Yeah.
And of course, the biggest link that we have between the two shows, which listeners of both shows may have noticed or you may have not, is of course that the meteor and the destruction of JM Labs both take place on December 7th of 2003. So that cosmic event caused by Etsy is actually the thing that brought that meteor there. So Etsy is actually the reason why Kai and Roscoe are both Silvertongues. Mm-hmm. Who played the ukulele for the song Tavi sang at the beginning of the series?
Oh, yeah.
This boy.
I played that. So Josie arranged a song. She did a little mini composition of a piece. And then, I played the chords. I think I played them there. And then I played them like a couple other times throughout the course of the the podcast. But yeah, it's just me and my ukulele. I've had a ukulele for years and years, so it was a chance for me to play just some basic chords, guys. It was like kind of like the 4 chords.
And next question. It was mentioned in the Discord that the events in Call of the Void happened about a year later. Have you thought at all about what happened to this lovely family during those events? Are you able to say?
That's a really good question. Yeah, like what happens to these Talbots hanging out?
I think that Roscoe and Tavi take some time to just be family together. I think after this whole big adventure and this whole big craziness of losing who they are, not knowing who they are, I think that Roscoe and Tavi, even though they're basically superheroes, I think they just focus on being a family, you know?
Yeah.
What was the hardest sequence to edit, and what was your favorite?
I think it's the same answer for both those for me, which is that whole ending sequence, the climax intercut between the 3 different towers.
So basically all of episode 7.
Yes, definitely like most of 7 and like the second half of 6.
Second half of 6 too.
The editing on that was so hard that we spent like days, probably like a week, weeks on just making sure that would work. You know, even just writing it.
It's so true because we had to go back and forth between 3 perspectives, and we weren't even sure how that was going to work in the sound design. We wanted it to be clear which perspective we were at, what location we were at. That's kind of actually why Tash is in the air, and she's kind of like serving as this mediator between all the things, because she can say like, Oceanside, how you doing? And then we go to Oceanside.
Absolutely.
And then it's just a very difficult edit. There's so much going on in all of those. There's paintball going off all over the place. There's airplane noises. There's so much.
It was kind of like the most difficult parts of everything else that had happened in the podcast were then all put into that sequence there. So you're right, like plane noises, paintball noises, cop chases. It was kind of like everything that had been complicated before was put in there. And I also want to say that the music scoring was especially challenging in that sequence too, because we wanted there to be this like definite rise fall in the music, and it was challenging to find the right songs for the right moments. Yeah. We definitely had an incredible composer, Jesse, who was involved in this process. And shout out to Jesse. He was so good, man. But it was still challenging, even with all of the resources that we had, to find the right underscoring to punctuate every moment.
There's so many different moods in all of that. There's like these very triumphant things, and then all of a sudden everything's going bad. Those were fun things to find. Like one of my favorite transitions is when Darcy gets the radio tower up and he's like, everything's going great, everything was funny, and then you just hear him get shot. All of a sudden, just like that, you're like, oh, shoot. Is this going to be bad? Like, everything was going so well. And then that really starts to tank everybody. Like, the moment Darcy gets shot, soon after that, Annika gets shot, and then Tash goes down, and Roscoe and Tavi are down. So I love feeling that rise and fall of that energy and that action and just the tone of the whole episode, really. So next question from Amanda here is, how did you record the waterfall rapid scene? It really sounded like people were battling to keep their heads above water.
Oh, thanks, Amanda. Yeah, you know, there are some really, really amazing water sounds that exist online, and then we also live by a wonderful lake. So water sounds are actually never a huge, big challenge for us. And it's sort of funny, like splashing noises does 90% of the work. Yeah. It's one of the easiest scenes to sound design, actually. Splashing water sounds like you're drowning, and it's a sound that actually can like be looped very easily. So yeah, that was a pretty easy one. It was honestly carried by the performances.
Yeah, they did awesome performances of getting a little water in their lungs as they're talking a little bit, and that really was 90% of it. Just adding water from that, and it sounded really great.
Yeah, I loved sound designing water scenes. I mean,
more water scenes. If
I could have a whole podcast of just water scenes, I mean, it'd be so terrible for all y'all to listen to it because it would just be the same sound. But I would, no footsteps, them just like in water splashing. So
just
great.
Splashing away.
Anyway, watch out for like a mermaid show coming at you.
Yeah. Next questions come from Chris. We've got a couple of questions here. First question is, what is the name of the island where the story starts?
Oh, Lahawi. I'm not sure if you can hear it, but it's very faint in the background. There's a conversation Tavi has with a guest, and the guest says, "How long have you been in Lahawi?" And that's the name of the island.
Mm-hmm. Another question from Chris is, what does Kalalani mean? That's a good question. It's an original name that we made. However, it's based on 2 Hawaiian words that basically together mean something like honey island or something like that.
Yeah.
Honey. We kind of wanted it to be like This is an island where everything seems sweet and honey-like.
And paradisical.
And paradisical, yes.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like, like the Lotus Island in like
Exactly,
old
yeah.
Greek mythology lore. It's this like place of paradise and vibrant colors. And with all that, this like beauty, there's also this undertone of like, ooh, something's a little spooky here. Like,
Yeah.
what's going on?
And last question from Chris here. Does Kai leave Roscoe on Kalani and moves Tavi to the first island after their minds are wiped in 2015? And that's a good question. I think that Roscoe and Tavi both started their life on Kalani, not knowing who they were and everything. But I think that they both independently left the island for Lahawi. And I think that just goes into that idea that it took a second for them to find each other. However, once they did, as Roscoe says, they just like each other, so they stuck around, Next question is from Maya. Oh, this is an interesting question. Do you think Roscoe and Tavi would like or ever meet Topher and Etsy? If not, or if so, why? She also says, love y'all and thank y'all so much for your phenomenal work.
Oh, gosh, Maya,
thanks,
thank you
Maya.
so much. Hey, we will say never. You never know what's gonna happen in our wild little world.
You never know.
But we are very interested in expanding the Voidverse to incorporate more stories and more characters and more character relationships. So we're always looking to both branch out and build connections, but we can neither confirm nor deny.
And as far as would they like each other, I think as soon as Topher found out who they were and what kind of abilities they have, I think he would be instantly smitten with with the both of them. And I think Etsy would be very relieved and happy to find someone else who shares supernatural abilities and is using those for good.
We have some questions here from Two Polar Cat. First question is, what would you do with Silvertongue powers?
That's a really good question. I mean, you know what? Like, I actually don't know if I would use Silvertongue powers. It's like a very powerful gift that is kind of scary, like knowing that you could like affect people in that way, which I think is what Roscoe goes through,
A little sad.
Yeah, and it's like once you put up one lie, it's like you have to keep plugging that hole with other lies. Like that's very much Kai's journey, right? Where he starts to lie and then the lies get bigger and bigger and he can't even control the island. There's a big difference between the past Kalani and the present Kalani. It's way more savage in like the present because people are turning on him, rightfully so. And then like the lies and everything starting to break apart. It's because Kai can't contain it anymore. It's been 3 years, over 3 years, because he landed in the island when he was younger. And so to see him sort of unravel like that is I think the truth of what having Silvertongue powers would be if you use them for lies. If you use them for truth, it is kind of like, once again, what we all have. We all have the ability to speak the truth.
And if I had silver-tonguing powers, I'd never get in trouble with the cops.
Next question is Kalalani and surrounding islands based on any real geographical locations? That's a great question. And the answer is kind of yes. So we mentioned before that we had the opportunity to go to Kauai, and Kalalani is basically the exact same shape as Kauai. It's a lot smaller, but we were very inspired by Kauai. It was kind of remote, not super touristy or anything.
And we also geographically wanted it to be a little bit lower and further than Hawaii is because it has a little bit of an influence of like Australia and sort of like Oceania on the other side.
And even New Zealand.
And yeah, New Zealand. So we wanted it to be like a little bit closer to that neck of the woods, kind of in a spot in the Pacific Ocean that doesn't really have any kind of, island there. But so it is a fictional place. It is kind of its own little spot, kind of in between the two of like a New Zealand and a Hawaii kind of vibe.
Where did the idea of Kai and the Silvertongue powers come from?
Dude, that's a crazy one. Good question. So this story actually existed a long time ago. Back in my graduate degree, I pitched this to a bunch of writers, and they liked the idea back then, but it was a completely different story then. It was
actually kind of like Twilight.
It was a lot like Twilight. Yeah, it was a very Pacific Northwest kind of moody story about this guy who had these powers that he could influence people's minds.
Well, it was actually like the lead was a girl.
And the girl, meets this guy.
A girl meets this guy, kind of like Bella and Edward. And in that version, the Silvertongue would be kind of just influencing her and, I don't know, like just kind of little devil in your ear kind of thing, right?
Yeah. So I guess it was a long time ago that I always thought the idea of if there was like a Silvertongue devil, I think the idea of mind control and influencing people kind of makes like a logical step. It kind of makes sense,
We went through a lot of, just like everything in this whole story, we went through a lot of iterations of Kai. From like, he is pretty innocent, but he's kind of, he's kind of broken on the inside, so he's doing all this to put up a front. I remember there was a version of Kai early on where all he did was really like try to take away people's pain. He would just be like, "Oh, so you have a son that died? Well, I'm just going to tell you that you've never had a son, and then you're not sad anymore."
He's a funny kind of villain, though. You're right, because he's kind of like a beach bum who's kind of a psychopath that gets this magical ability.
Yeah.
Which is a character we'd never seen before.
Right. We really got interested in this idea of someone who doesn't really know who he is, but he's searching. And when he gets the superpower, in his hubris, he's like, wow, I guess the answer I was looking for is that I'm a god.
Sure, yeah. He's always sort of, polluting his instrument. He's
Yeah.
putting tar, like, in him.
Yeah, like even the small little detail of him smoking all the time, it plays into it. You'll see that he smokes more and more as the show progresses. When he first starts off, he's smoking in a lot of the scenes, I guess. But like at the end, he's like just like smoking every scene. He'll just whip out a cigarette. We just love the idea that he has this beautiful voice, this beautiful instrument. But what is he doing with it? He's polluting it with tar. He's taking it and corrupting it with something that is destroying himself as well as the island.
Oh, we also wanted Kai to be this idea of a false prophet character. He like thinks that he's the Messiah, but he's a false Messiah. So even that is a lie, right? Like everything around Kai is very much a lie. And there's even a comparison and contrast between him and then Etsy, where Etsy does things and she's kind of like a chosen who is like tasked with saving the world and removing the hollow and all this stuff. But we see this guy who desperately wants to be that, and he's clinging to that so hard that it's making him not the savior. And that's a very interesting psychological thing, to like crave something so much that it makes you bad.
I think my favorite thing that we do is we have an imaginary assistant to Kai, whose name is Jeremy. And Kai just constantly monologues to Jeremy, just complaining about everything about his life.
Yeah, he just has a complete unfiltered access.
Or he'll be like, Jeremy, let's go out to karaoke.
If you were going to go out to karaoke, what would be your song, Jeremy? No, you can't pick that song. That's
my song, Jeremy. Gosh. Well, moving on to the next question, more, which is actually not a question. It's just more Tash, Fargo, and Darcy, please. We don't have all the plans in the books about this, but we're not saying no to anything. So yeah, we agree. We love Tash, Fargo, and Darcy. Oh yeah, and that was like, I think early on, Darcy was a character that we just kind of had written in as he's in that episode where he scares them away with snakes. But then it wasn't until later that we were like, oh my gosh, you know what would work really, really well is if Darcy and the Kaminskys know each other and work together all the time. And we're like, oh my gosh, that's genius. So yeah, that little trio of Darcy, Fargo, and Tash, love them.
Yeah, love them. In fact, in Call of the Void, for like Call of the Void fans, there's like a scene at the end when they're repairing the Summers house.
Yeah, our little fan theory.
Our fan theory is that that Darcy and Tash were part of that cleanup crew, because Fargo just says she knows some people, and I think that those are definitely at least two of the people that she's referring to that can get there in a wink and are able to do some serious, construction.
Okay, next question is, are Kai and Roscoe and maybe Tavi the only Silvertongues, and was being at or associated with the Eagle Ridge incident a requirement for developing the powers? This is such an interesting question. I'm glad you asked, because I think the character Necromon in The Call of the Void also is a Silvertongue.
Yeah.
So being at the Eagle Ridge incident, I don't think that was a requirement. The only requirement is some kind of connection with or some kind of encounter with the Void, or some kind of connection with the repercussions of what happened on December 7th of 2003.
Yeah.
So that meteor that hit, that kind of like came from the other dimension, so they got a little bit of that power coming through. But if you are a listener of Call of the Void, you've met the character Necromon, and towards the end of the show, in season 3, there's some moments where Necromon does this thing where he's like, come here, and Etsy's like, ah! And I think that is the first time that we actually see someone doing a little bit of silver-tonguing.
Yeah, I think for Necromon, it is a little bit more of a challenge. I think Necromon's abilities, he's got other abilities that he has a little bit like stronger control over, but I think silver-tonguing is kind of just like one of them that's not as strong. I think the characters of Roscoe and Kai are certainly the strongest Silvertongues.
Yeah, maybe just because they got blasted with that meteor.
They're the strongest encounters with Silvertongues that we've had up to this point. But yes, absolutely, Necromon's a Silvertongue.
Yep. Mm-hmm. A little fun fact for you there. But yeah. Oh, and also, like, could there be more Silvertongues? Yeah, there could be more Silvertongues out there. Not committing to anything right now, but the possibility of more Silvertongues? Absolutely. Will we be seeing more from the people of Kalalani or Roscoe and Tavi?
Yeah, once again, never say never. There's a chance that we incorporate more of these characters in other ways. But the same way we said this at the end of Call of the Void, which was that whatever story we tell, we want to make sure that it has something to say and that it makes sense and that it means something. Kind of all three of those requirements. And so when we set up for our next stories, we do want to make sure that it fits in the world and there's a reason to it. We don't want to just, grab them and throw them into an adventure just for no reason,
Right.
So we would want to make sure that they're incorporated into the adventure appropriately.
And that those characters have somewhere to go.
Yeah.
Like if we realize like, ooh, there's more here with their characters, we have another story for them that kind of like needs to be told or that we really, really want to tell. Currently, no plans are made, but like we said, never say never. Oh, yes. The next question is from Jason. We love Jason. Jason is an incredible man who has been with us since the dawn of time, or at least the dawn of our shows. So, Jason, as always, we really appreciate you, buddy. Jason asks, are there plans for character playlists similar to what you did for characters from Call of the Void? If yes, I need to know what Seth is spinning currently. So music is actually one of the things that really inspires us as writers. We listen to music all the time as we're coming up with stories. And even just after we're done writing a story, we like to listen to our character playlists just to think about the characters. And for Call of the Void, we created these Spotify playlists. We have one for Etsy, we have one for Topher, we have one for Fargo. I think we have some other ones, like there's like a Officer Mason ride along and stuff like that. So they're just very, very fun things. And for our Patreon members, we actually did recently go ahead and make Jason's dream come true and create some Spotify playlists. We've got a TK Skies mixtape. We have a Sunrise with Seth mix. We have a Roscoe and Tavi playlist, and my personal favorite is the Rebel Team Beach Party mixtape. So once again, those are available on our Patreon for our Patreon members. We're also working on getting a page up for just our one-time donors. If you want to help out, but you don't want to commit to a monthly Patreon, we still want to thank you guys with some bonus content. So right now we're currently making a page with all of our Silvertongue specific content to send to our one-time donors of Silvertongues. So look out for that, donors. Coming your way. Finally, last question from Two Polar Cat here. What's next for you guys now that Silvertongues is over?
Hey, really good question. I'm so glad you asked. What a great question to go out on here. The next projects. Yes, we have more projects on the horizon. We love the podcast scene. We're truly so thankful to all of you listening. And if you've gotten this far in this episode, we especially thank you for checking this out and supporting us. It means the world to us. Yeah, we have 3 new, are we going to say them?
I guess we can say them, and if we decide to take this out, then we will take it out.
Yeah. So we have 3 podcasts that we are currently in various stages in developing. Those are titled Liminal,
Turf,
and Amaryllis. And those are the 3 titles that are going to be our next 3 shows.
In no particular order.
A couple of those are smaller. They're more like mini-series. One of them is another full series. Most of them are also part of the Voidverse, so they're expanding this world. They're doing other things,
If you recognize the name Amaryllis, I'm not going to say anything,
right.
But you might recognize the name Amaryllis.
Sure. So yeah, those are stories that we're interested in exploring, and we're actively pursuing to develop and share with all of you. We love this medium. We love all of you, and sharing stories in this kind of capacity. It means a lot to us. It really does. So truly one of the best ways to help us, if you're interested in helping us create more of these stories, would probably be joining our Patreon. Even $1 a month is huge to help us create these next shows.
We love making ad-free shows, and we hear from you guys all the time that you love that as well. So we really do totally rely on the incredible, awesome donations from you guys to make all of our shows.
We can't wait to bring these next properties your direction. They're going to be so much fun. They're going to be very distinct and exciting. So that's what's happening over here in this little workshop.
All right. Thanks, y'all. Love you guys. Stay tuned. Stay safe.